Somebody asked me the other day if I was going to a wedding, and I was like, it's funny that you say that. It's funny that you say that. So I began the conversation about that there's a supper coming, right? So I love it because people look at me and they have that confused look on their face. So happy Sunday, guys. How is everybody? I mean, we've got a room packed full today, don't we? Well, I hope I didn't run everybody off with my matzah recipe last week, but I mean, it's important to remember those things. And I was thinking about it a little bit, you know, well, when I say a little bit, the cogs were churning in my head. And you think about what Jesus gave us right before he committed sacrifice for us. He gave us a meal. And when you really sit and think about that long enough, who provided that meal? Right? Because we think that we do all this stuff with our own hands, don't we? But ultimately, in the end, you didn't grow the grain, you didn't grind it, you didn't do any of that. Someone else provided it for you. And that segues right into what relationship is all about, living in right relationship, because nobody is an island. And I know that's pretty cliche, but we have to have a community around us to keep us accountable and to watch over us, right? That's what we do for each other. So in Romans, we're in Romans chapter 8. If you guys didn't, I mean, big crowd, get the regulars here, right? We're in Romans chapter 8, and we're going to verse 18, but I want to recap, because a lot of times when you study intensely into the argument trace, you lose the big picture. So in Romans chapter 8, he starts with the idea that there's no condemnation anymore for those of us who are in Christ, because he was the one who was the only righteous one, who fulfilled the righteous order of the law that the flesh couldn't do. The flesh couldn't achieve it, you know. And when we talked about flesh, we talked about the animal nature of man versus the human nature and what we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to reflect in the world. So when you think about that, when you think about the righteous requirement of the law fulfilled in us, every time I read that phrase, it's beautiful because it goes all the way back to Genesis. When you think about Abraham and he stares at the stars, because what was it that God made a promise to Abraham about? That his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. And we're all adopted into the family of Abraham. It's God's family. Who do we all call father? It's really good. It's beautiful because that's the righteous requirement of the law. Because you think God would, you know, hold out on Abraham? He made him a promise. God's righteous. That's what Paul's spent 7 chapters up to this point talking about how righteous God is, how he lives in right relationship with us, yet we wrestle back and forth with ourselves and what we want versus what he wants. And we wrestle. We wrestle over and over and over again. So, with that, he moves on to we're heirs. We're in verse 12. He moves on and he says, we're debtors. So then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh, because that's death, right? I'm just paraphrasing Paul here. But we're debtors in the fact that our life doesn't belong to us. Exactly. Great. Right out of the corner there. Because who does it belong to? The one that was righteous to us before we were ever even righteous to him. Before we wanted to live in right relationship, who cared for us? Who loved us when we were the person from chapter 1, right? Who was the person who loved us when we were the descriptive identifier of the person from chapter 1? So because God is our dad, guess what? We don't live in fear because he created everything. So what is it that can hurt us or separate us? Right? Paul later, he mentions that. But that's the argument, that's the frame that he's putting it into, that life, the Spirit is life because of righteousness, because God gave it to us. He gave us life so that we could see. He gave it to us through his Son, so that he uses this idea of heirs, right? And if you're a descendant of Abraham, okay, remember there's a room. In the room, you've got 3 groups of people. You've got those who are just coming in, the chapter 1 people. You've got the chapter 2 people, and then you get the chapter 3 people. All those people, Paul first tells them how terrible they are, right? And then it's so funny because the chapter 3 people, he's like, look, you guys had the law, and how did you do with that? How'd that work for you? Right? You had it, and it didn't work for you because it just them under the weight of it because they thought they could do it with their own hands, and they didn't. They couldn't achieve it. So, excuse me, he moves on to this idea that we're heirs. So like that because what is it that God says to Abraham? If you guys remember from Genesis chapter 15. Remember, Abraham's running for his life because he's just done this night operation to get Lot back. And he's raided these kings who have all this power. And he's running for his life. And then God comes to him in the middle of the night. And he says, Abraham, I am your reward. Right? And that part always kind of throws us off. We're like thinking, well, reward. Okay. What did I do to earn the reward? Right? You go back and look at Genesis chapter 15, and it'll throw you in all kinds of loops. What you realize in that is that the promises that God made, he put himself on the line for. He's the one who passed through the mess that Abraham made. He's the one that passed through that. That was God's righteousness. Not one of us can brag about how good of a person we are, can we? Because every good deed that we've ever done, it was through the Spirit in the first place. Because the things we wrestle with is that we're wrestling with the flesh. So Paul moves on to this idea, and I think he firmly implants that in our head. And I think if that's not implanted in your head, we'll go have coffee after church, okay? And we'll talk about how it doesn't matter how many rules that you follow, you will fall short. It doesn't matter what you try to do, you're going to fall short. And the reason you fall short is because God is your Father. He wants you to talk to him. And when we separate ourselves from him and we say we can do this on our own, like my toddler children do, right? Like you guys experience that where a child's like, I can do it on my own. And the moment they try to get the orange juice out of the fridge, guess what they do? Spilled all over the place, right? And then it's like, oh, what have you done? And you could overreact to that situation and be like, well, that's terrible. I'm glad God never acts like I did when I was younger and my kids were smaller, and overreact to the situation. But God doesn't do that to us, right? He's awesome. Our God is awesome because he doesn't overreact. He says, well, do you think that was smart? Right? Like I hear that one all the time. Do you think that was wise to do today? When I'm talking to Dad, I'm having that conversation. Because as a father, that's the one thing that I want more than anything, right? You guys, all fathers in the house, you have children, right? You want your kids, what do you want? You want them to talk to you. That's what I want. I've got 3 teenagers at the house. Do you guys know what that's like? It is the quietest place ever. When they were younger, that's what I wanted. I wanted just quiet. Just give me peace and quiet. And now that they're teenagers, and all 3 of them, I'm like, hey, how was your day? Good. Good. Well, what happened during your day? Did you learn anything? It's time to grow, right? And they're just like, yeah, stuff, good. Right? That's what teenagers do. And now the thing I long for in my house is for them to just talk to me, right? Like, it's like, just talk to me. Just tell me. Like I asked those open-ended questions. Do you think that was a good idea? Explain your point, right? And they're just like, yeah, it was good. Okay. That's it. Just because I felt it was good, right? Because they've become cat people, right? That's what I call it. Somebody mentioned that one time. I picked that up somewhere. But they've become like cat people. Now they're quiet, and they don't ever seek out any kind of advice or talk to me or anything. But when you're in relationship with somebody, what do you have to do? What's the most important thing? Like, we all know this. Communication. We forget that, don't we? We think that it's like, okay, if I read the words in this book, I'm communicating. But we forget. We forget that we have a Father who hears the things that we worry about. And we forget, and we say, well, maybe I can find the answer somewhere else. But he holds everything in his hands. So why is it that we seek out after other things? That's the frame, okay? As heirs, God is our Father. But we're debtors because we know who pulled us out of the thing. It's a good debt to have, isn't it? Because we've been called from death to what? To life. And if we see everything through the perspective of God and how he calls everything into life, Remember the Spirit hovering over the waters? Why did he create dry land in the first place? Do you think that he needed it? Why did he put the seeds in the ground before he even created the dry land? Do you think God needs the fruit and vegetables? How about the skies? Do you think he needed the skies? No, he didn't. He created those things for us, and we take those for granted all the time, don't we? Like I was watching the sunset the other day, and I was like, man, I missed the sunset from the day before. When you think about it, that sunset will never happen again. Never. Your position in the universe and everything has to line up perfectly for you to experience that one sunset. That's why you look at it and you say, oh, how glorious. The only time we ever really use that word in our modern context is when we look at the sunset and we realize how small we are in the universe. But at the same time, what the law couldn't do through our flesh, his Son did for righteousness. So that righteousness could be revealed in us. Because who are the descendants of Abraham? I know this room is not full, and it's hard to see it, but all over the world today, millions and millions of Christians are gathering around Jesus. Doesn't matter what kind of church they're in. It could be a house church. It could be a big cathedral church. But there's millions of Christians gathering. And you don't see it on the TV because they don't want you to. But you've got brothers and sisters who speak every known language. You realize that? And some of the brothers and sisters that you have are under heavy persecution. The very fact that if they came out and said that they were Christians, they would lose their life, they would lose their property, they would lose everything that they had. And that's their life. Because that's more important to them. Jesus is more important to them than their very livelihood. Right? So, in that context, that's the church he's talking to. It's really easy to put yourself into this church because this church is in the middle of Rome. And I know I'm talking this up a lot, but trust me, it's worth it, okay? It's worth it to put ourselves in that frame of mind before we start to eat. Because a lot of times you set the table, and if you don't put the things in the right spaces, then people start eating out of order, okay? So put yourself in the frame of mind. Just think like you're Christian in first century Rome, and the emperor wants to do nothing more than to stick you to a stake and set you on fire. That's where you live. And every guard, every policeman of the day wants to find some way to rub you out of the picture. While everyone else in society, the common theme in society is people are entertaining themselves. They go to the Colosseum to watch Christians get eaten by lions. They go out on the streets to watch them being used as torches in the middle of the night. Their entertainment value is how bad can the emperor ostracize and humiliate these people whose God is a human, right? That's the world that they live in. I don't think it's much different than our world. It's not. Because if you look, just turn on the TV. I mean, I don't know how many of you actually watch TV, but you watch, everything is set to ridicule people who believe in the God that we serve. Everything's set to ridicule him on every level. And you think about it, is that much different than Rome in the first century? The only difference is our persecution, you don't see it as persecution. You see it as those people entertaining themselves. Unless you realize that that's what they're doing. So for their own glory, they push other people down. That's the way of the world, isn't it? That's what people do. Because there's two options when you come to something that's greater than yourself. The first option is to drag it down to your level, to try to destroy it. And the second option is to actually try to raise yourself up to be better than you were the day before. Okay, so without further ado, I'll read the last sentence of I'll read verse 17, and then that'll segue us right into 18, because that's how he ends the first argument and he begins the next argument. He says, we're in Romans chapter 8, guys, and we're starting on verse 17. And I've talked for 15 minutes before I even started reading. So there's a lot of framing that I did. So he says, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willing, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption, and to obtain freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly. We wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope, that is, seen, is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for with patience. All right, so I'll end right there. He laid a lot of stuff out, didn't he? He laid it out pretty heavy for us. The thing with our modern culture is that who suffers? Like we don't hold that in high regard, do we? Well, I waited and I waited and I waited and I finally got the thing that I wanted. Okay? We don't do that anymore, do we? Everything is based on instant gratification. Everything is based on what I'm going to get right now and how I'm going to look for getting it. So he says, I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Now, there's one of those words, right? One of those Bible words, glory. Everyone thinks glory, they think the halo and the light and, the wings, that's what people imagine. I have a hunch that if you just walked up to a secular person, like at Food City or whatever, and you said, oh, glory, what does glory mean to you? And they would instantly tell you, it's the halo thing, or it's the person who glows, right? They think it's a radiant glow. And I've preached this over and over again. Glory has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with your identity. See, like man, if you remember in Romans chapter 1, what does Paul say? Man traded his what? Glory for what? The created things. He started to worship the created things. And because he did that, guess what? He became the biggest hypocrite there was. Because he traded his identity for the things of nature, for the things that were created. He became the most unnatural thing in all of creation. See how that works? It's like that. I like to use, I don't know if my dad's putting this on YouTube, but I like to use the Al Gore idea. You think about Al Gore, and he's all about nature, right? Mr. Nature. He's all about saving the planet. And he talks about how everyone's so terrible because you drive your SUV or your car around. In the meantime, he's flying jets over the ocean so that he can tell everyone else how terrible they are about all the carbon they're putting in the atmosphere while he's just pumping it out left and right. See, because he traded his dignity or his identity for what he thought was going to attain power for him. And because he did that, he became the most unnatural thing. We have a word for it. It's called a hypocrite. He became the hypocrite that he sought to get rid of. That's what human beings do. We trade our identity that God gave us for what? For dust and ashes, for smoke. If you go to the book of Ecclesiastes, he says it's smoke. Every time you try to grasp onto it, you try to build this identity of who you are, like some people think it's important what color shirt they wear on what day of the week. I mean, it gets that petty, right? How people can get so petty, or the certain look that they're trying to get in their life, and they're trying to, pull off that, I don't know, just pick a look, right? Because the people have the blue hair and stuff like that. Just pick something like that. And what is it that they become? Trying to become the most natural person that they can be, they become the most unnatural person that there is. Because they don't look to the one who created nature in the first place. That's what glory has to do with, our identity. So where do you identify, and what glory is he talking about? This is the glory that is yet to be revealed to us. So he moves on. So there's the identity that's yet to be revealed to us, because we only know in part, right? Here we are on planet Earth, and all we can see is what's directly in front of us. It's hard to see past through the veil into the other, where our true identity exists. The person that we're meant to be exists. Does that make sense? You guys with me still? All right, okay. So I'm going to move on. So he says, for the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. Okay? For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. Okay, so that, it seems kind of confusing, right? You guys all got it? I don't have to explain it. Okay, I'm gonna try to make it as simple as I can. Okay, have you guys ever been to a restaurant and did grand opening at the restaurant and everything was so amazing? And you were just like, wow, this is the best restaurant I've ever been to. You go tell all your friends about the restaurant. You go to the restaurant, you take everybody with you, and it's like a party. And everything that you wanted in a restaurant is there at the restaurant. But somehow, over time, there's cigarette butts on the ground. They're not cleaning the booths out. The waiters, they start to become rude. And everything just seems like it's falling apart in the restaurant. I'm just using restaurant as an analogy, okay? It could be that shop that you like to go to. All of a sudden, they're not picking up the clothes, or they're not making the shelves nice anymore, and it's just not the same place it used to be. Well, that's creation. Why is it that a place like that falls apart? It's improperly managed. Now, God gave creation to who? Yeah, us, right? What's happening to creation? Well, if you ask Al Gore, we're destroying it, which he's not far from the truth, because since the beginning, we have subjected creation to our desire and our will. Okay? But a half-truth isn't a full truth. A really good lie is 99% true and 1% lie. It's still a lie. This is the reality. The earth that we see and the creation that we see, everything that we see is terrible, or whatever judgment you want to project over it. Whose fault is that? Do you think about in Haiti, okay? In Haiti. Like, we talk about natural disasters. No, I've had this argument several times with secular people, non-God-following, Bible-loving Christians. I've had this conversation with them. They say, well, if God is so good, what about natural disasters? Why would you do that to innocent women and children? You guys ever got that? Got that question? And they propose, it's called the problem of evil argument. They say, if God is so good, why is there evil? And the question, you can flip it back on them and you say, well, why do you say that there's good and evil? There has to be a standard in the first place, right? How could you even say that that thing was evil if you didn't have a standard that you went by? Anyway, I'll give an example. In Haiti, they had that hurricane, right? A hurricane hit Haiti, and it almost wiped Haiti off the map. Thousands and thousands of people were displaced from their homes. It was a humanitarian tragedy of an epic proportion. Do you know why it was same-size hurricanes hit Florida almost every year, hit Florida every year. Do you know why it was a humanitarian tragedy when it hit Haiti? Because we made it that way. For hundreds of years, companies have been stealing from Haiti, underpaying those people so they couldn't build the proper infrastructure. Like, people say that's a natural disaster. No, it's not a natural disaster. It's a man-made disaster. Why? Because we didn't prepare. We knew it was coming. We didn't prepare. But instead we took from those people. We took, and they had nothing when the storm came. So what happened to them? They were displaced, died. The tsunami in India. You guys know why that was so bad? It wasn't because the tsunami was so big. It's because we weren't prepared. Because we stole from those people over generations and generations and generations. When people talk about terrible natural disasters that happen, I mean, name one. And I'll show you the trail of where humankind was the one who was to blame for that. It's like this. Would you blame God if you built your house on the side of a volcano? That's the basis of the argument. Would you blame God if you built your house on the side of a volcano and didn't make it fireproof? Would you blame God if you lived on the side of a volcano? As creation, that's what we do, right? We build our houses in weird places, and then we say all of a sudden it's God's fault that all this stuff happened. Try to blame him for everything, don't we? It's like, well, I mean, at what point are humans accountable for the things that have happened versus God being accountable for the things that have happened? And then you get to open up the argument even further, and you get to talk about who took responsibility for us so that we don't have to die. Okay, so that's the basic how you unravel. I don't know why we went that direction, but that's creation. That's creation. We look at creation and we say, well, look at the birds and the bees, how everything harmonizes together and it works. And then we insert ourselves into the situation, and what happens? Well, next thing you know, there's cigarette butts in the parking lot, and the whole thing is mismanaged. And we think we're doing good, like the California wildfires. That's one of my favorites. Do you know why the California wildfires were so bad? Because they didn't do anything about the underbrush. They thought that by doing nothing, that was the best thing to do. But the nothing that they did led to the something that they suffered. Right? So anytime we try to interject and we think we know better, guess what we end up doing? We drop the ball, and then the whole thing gets mismanaged. Right? The fires and the Smokies, everyone blamed what? It was 2 kids that did that. But do you know it was mismanagement of the underbrush? Because in the forest, naturally in the forest, there's not roads that run through it. There's animals that run through it. And you know what they do to the underbrush? They trample it down, and it creates mulch. So whose fault is it that the fires in the Smokies? Whose fault is it? The hurricane in Haiti. The aftermath of those things is almost exclusively our fault. And anytime you see one of those happen, anytime you see a tsunami or a hurricane or a reactor meltdown or some children that are in trouble, who's the first people that respond to that situation? We don't really take much credit for it, do we? You see Christian organizations pop up everywhere. Samaritan's Purse, all those things. So when Paul, when he makes this argument, that the creation itself is waiting why? Why is it waiting? Well, because the earth is under bad management. So, if it's under bad management, why is it put in bad management in the first place? Well, because God gave us the reins over creation so that we could see how bad we are at managing without him. Does that make any sense? There's a personal story, like if I go and I make decisions in my household before consulting God, guess what happens 99% of the time? It's a bad decision. You know why? Because I made it. If I consult God before I do it, guess who's there with me? Guess who's bound himself to us? Yeah, congratulations. Because we all call him what? Abba, Father. Okay? So here's creation. It's groaning. It's calling out. We know that the whole of creation has been groaning together in pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons. Now, that's the beauty of the situation, right? Because the moment, I think a lot of us, we don't realize that we are actually partners with God. We're his partner. That's what he created mankind for in the first place. Do you guys realize that? That he created man, half dirt and half him, so that man could be the reflection of who he is into creation. Now, if you back up before Genesis chapter 2, and you look at God and the way that he operated, everything was done building to a culmination to where he could bring man into the world, so that he could give him the reins over the world. And it was created in an order and a sequence. And if you watch, when man falls, what happens? The sequence goes backwards. All of a sudden, the serpent that was the beast that man was supposed to rule over is telling the woman what she's supposed to be doing, and then the woman is telling the man what he should be doing. See how it just undoes itself, because we always do it backwards, don't we? We think that I make a decision, right? I make a decision in my life, and I've made the right decision, and then it undoes itself because I didn't consult. I went in the backwards way. And then when I cry out to God and I say, God, listen, the bad decision I made, you got to fix it. But sometimes it's not the thing that you've got yourself into that he fixes. He fixes your perspective so that you see that he's the only one who could have fixed it before you even started the project. Does that make sense? Because what we do a lot of times is we flip the order of creation around and we think, oh, I'm going to make a decision, I'm going to get myself into a bad spot, and then what? And then I'm going to cry out to God. Instead of crying out to God, getting in a position, and then being successful. That's what we do, don't we? Because what does every father want? You guys remember when I framed the picture? What does every father want? He wants you to talk to him. Right? Like, I'm a father of 3 teenagers. I know I've said that already. Somebody didn't hear that. But I'm a father of 3 teenagers, and when they were little, I just wanted quiet, and now I want them to talk to me. Do you think my son would make a wiser decision if he said, Dad, do you think it's a good idea if I go out at midnight with my friends and go do this and that and this? Just speaking from personal experience, it's not a good idea, and I probably should have consulted my dad first. Because that's how we always get in trouble, isn't it? We never consult that. We take the problems that we have and we say, oh, they're my problems, I'm going to take them, and this is what I'm going to do. And when we do that, every time that we do that, we create a mess of our lives. Amen? So, the whole of creation is groaning out because it's waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. Here's the idea that he's putting forth. He's waiting for the sons of God to be revealed because those people reflect God into the world. God put us here so that we could manage creation and bring it to its full potential. You realize that? That's what we were put here for. That's why people create, houses and skyscrapers and art and music. You know what you don't see doing those things? Animals don't do those things. I feel like we've stepped into an era of time where we stopped creating art. Why? Well, because if you look on the news, what has everybody become? They've kind of turned into animals, haven't they? It's all about what I can get from me, myself, and the things that I care about. And what are we doing to creation when we do that? Yeah, we're not picking up anymore. We're not taking care of the parking lot. We're not. It's being mismanaged. So for the sons of God to be revealed as the heirs that we have, he says eagerly. The earth is eagerly awaiting. And we also are eagerly awaiting. Because when you look at the world and you watch what people do to each other, does that not hurt? Does that hurt? You see people, how they're capable of just stealing everything. And then the hurricane comes and wipes those people out. Does it move you with compassion? It moves a certain group of people because they're always the first ones to show up, aren't they? They're always the first ones to be there. Doesn't matter. They don't need a billboard, right? Like, you don't see, like, it's funny to me, like, you'll see these corporations now. You guys see the corporations and they're like, look at how great we are because we support this movement. Or look at how great we are because we support that movement, right? But you'll never see Christians walking around. I hope. I mean, maybe sometimes. It might happen. You'll never see real Christians walking around saying, look at how awesome I am because I helped that person over there. Because you didn't clearly read where Jesus said, don't brag about the stuff you did because you already received your reward. You didn't listen to that part. That was important. You should have listened to that. Right? But you don't see them with the billboards. And that's why people, they just want to trash us all the time and make fun of us and ostracize our God and say how poor we are because we only have one God or whatever it is. And they just seek to entertain themselves all the time. And while they're entertaining themselves, what have they done? They've traded the dignity that God gave human beings to be his partner in the world, to bring about new life in places where there wasn't before. You got to realize how awesome that is. The real power is the one that you can share. And God did that from the very beginning. And he cared about us so much that he knew how bad we'd get as teenagers, that he had a plan set in place for us. So here's the world groaning inwardly. And it says, verse 24, he says, for in this hope we were saved. Right? What an interesting idea. Because why were we saved? Why would God just not let us all drown with the flood? Because hope. If you remember, in the very beginning of this chapter, he talks about what the law did. The law, what couldn't be fulfilled by the flesh in the law, was fulfilled by his Son. So that righteousness might be found where? In us. Why is that? Well, if you look at the model, because Paul's going all the way back to creation, right? The very beginning. He's going all the way back to the very beginning. Why did he create humans in the first place? To reflect his image in the world. So when Jesus comes on the scene, he's the only human that ever reflected God's image into the world. He's the only human that did so. So when he comes in, what does he do? Instantly, he picks 12 guys to follow him around, and guess what? He teaches these 12 guys to be like him. Very patiently, by the way. I mean, some of the interactions, I'm like, oh, Peter, like slap your head. Like, why would you do that, Peter? Why did you do that, Peter? And I'm like, oh, Adam, slap my own head, right? Because our God's patient. He's really patient. Is he, I don't know if I'm doing something with the mic here, but it seems like something else is coming through there. So if he's patient with us, we go back to creation. Why do you think God called us into his family in the first place? I mean, Paul just says it right here, doesn't he? One little sentence. For in this hope, we were saved. Why? What are we supposed to be doing to reflect God's image in the world? If Jesus came to seek and save, then what's the hope of creation? And what are we supposed to be doing? It's a good question, right? Because if we miss that point, we've missed hope altogether. Because it's all tied together. See, hope is an interesting word in Hebrew. Hope is a very interesting word. Paul was an avid Hebrew speaker. If you guys didn't know, Paul was a Jew. In Hebrew, hope means to pull a cord tight. Yichal is the word. To put a cord under tension. Because that's what hope does to us. It puts us under tension. If you're not under tension, looking at the world the current way it is, then there's something wrong with you. Because everyone is under tension. Everyone looks at the world and they say, well, this is what's wrong. And that's what's wrong. And those people over there, they're what's wrong. And if we could just get rid of that group of people, they're what's wrong. And they all live under this tension of hope. And we have hope in all kinds of things. We have hope in all kinds of things. Like I've heard people say, I hope I get a new Corvette, or I hope I win the lottery, or I hope I put... What they're really saying to you is that they're under tension. They are under tension that that's what they're going to get. At the end of the road that they're on, the tension that they're pulling on the rope, as they're trying to pull whatever object it is or empty, hollow thing that they think is going to bring them fulfillment, they pull on the rope, that's what's going to be at the end of the rope. That's what hope is. Okay? But our hope, where does our hope exist? It doesn't exist in something created or hollow. It exists in Jesus. And whatever weight we put on that rope, whoever it's attached to, is the ultimate reward. So in Genesis 15, when you see Abram, and he's running for his life, and God comes to him and he says, I'm your reward. God's right there in front of him. Where's Abram's hope? That God is right there. God's right there with him. Now, to be in a state of hope means that you're under tension. And you can put hope in all kinds of things. You can put hope in your children, and guess what? You'll crush them. If you try to live through your children, and you say, hey, you're going to be an engineer or a professional skateboarder or whatever it is that you hoped, but you couldn't quite pull the rope hard enough. Or when you got to the end of the rope, right? Anyone heard that phraseology before? When you got to the end of the rope, you found that the thing that you were chasing after was empty. So the weight, the tension you put on that rope, when you put that on your children, your husband, or your wife, guess what that does to them? It crushes them. It crushes them completely. Because we can't place hope in the people that we love and expect them to love us back. The only one who can carry our hope is the one who carried the cross up the hill. The heaviest weight mankind ever had to bear was the sacrifice that only God could do through his Son. Amen? In all the places of hope, that is where it is. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it in patience. Now, does that sentence make sense? It does when you understand the nature of hope and the nature of nature. Because even the earth that you're standing on is crying out. Because mankind, what have we done? The problem with the world is us. But the solution of the world is also through us. Because who do we look to save us? The only one who can carry our hope in the first place. The world is waiting for the new manager to come in. The guy who actually cares. Right? Because you see the manager who comes into the store or the restaurant, and he's the one who goes, okay, enough of this. This is going to change. This is going to change. This is going to change. And once he steps onto the scene, guess what? Everything changes. And it becomes what it was meant to be in the first place. And that's what the earth, or I know a restaurant is kind of a silly example, but we're talking about the entirety of the earth. Everything. I mean, people do the most terrible things to each other. And we kind of either ignore it or we put hope in ourselves and we try to take care of it ourselves. But we can't because the weight of it, the very weight of it. So he says we wait for it in patience. We wait for it with patience. Under tension where we live. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And I know you guys, I just have a hunch. Everybody's been in that situation where they've seen something on the news and they've seen something terrible that a mother has done to her child, or that a father has done to his child, or something that someone has done to someone else, or that even has been done to us, and we don't even have words. And all we can do is weep and groan. It's all we can do. You know what that is? That's a prayer. That's what Paul says right here. Because what's the Spirit doing through us? It's mourning. Where is God in that moment? The one question I get all the time is life is hard, especially for us, right? Because we know this is not how it's supposed to be. We know this isn't the way the world's supposed to work. We know that people are supposed to take care of each other. We're supposed to be compassionate. merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and truth. Yet, what is wrong? And Paul put his finger on it. Right here. This is what it is. We don't even have words for how terrible we are as human beings. The Spirit groans through us. And if the Spirit groans through us, who's with us? If you're moved with compassion for the terrible things that happen in the world, where is God in that moment? He's right there with you, groaning right alongside of you. Where's His Spirit? Because previously in this chapter, he says if you have the Spirit of life in you, then you have Christ in you. And if you have Christ in you, you have, he tries to confuse you with those things. If, Jesus does the same thing to his disciples in John. But how do we know? What's evidence of the Spirit inside of us? When we see something that just turns our stomach, and we don't even have words. And you begin that prayer of, God, how could this be? What has this world become? They're not even sweeping the parking lot anymore. And that sounds frivolous, but that's what it is. You're looking at the world through the hands of as we betray each other and do all kinds of evil things to each other, gossip and slander. The very hell comes out of us. And we bring it into the world, and we manifest it. And we look at it, and we don't even have words, because we know this is not the way it's supposed to be. So he says, we don't know how to pray, so here's the Spirit praying through us, praying through groaning, too deep for words. And He who searches hearts knows what it is, the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. So, I know a lot of people take this one passage right here, and they pull it out of context. Right? They pull it out of context. And I want you to understand, when Paul is saying this, he's talking about when we see the tragedy of human existence, when we see what people do to children, when they're human trafficking, when we see those things, we groan from our very souls. It comes out through us. And we know, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. And we know that God is good because, guess what? Death does not have the final word. Those current sufferings that those children are facing, or your loved ones are facing, they do not have the final word, because there's an empty tomb. And that's where our hope ultimately lies. That's where it lies, in that place. Because where is He? The world tried to kill Him, the only man who lived righteously, and where is He? Well, if you listen to Him, He says He's with us. He does not leave us as orphans. He's here with us until the end of the age. Now, if that's not good news, I don't know what is. Because we look at the world, and it just turns. Am I the only one that sees that? Watch the news, and it just turns my stomach on what people do to each other on a daily basis. So what am I going to do? Am I going to take up a sword and, slay all those who've done those terrible things? And if so, am I not capable of the same thing? So my hope can only exist in one place, and that's in the empty tomb. That's what puts me under tension, because I know it's not how it's supposed to be. I know no matter what evil tries to manifest itself in the world, it does not get the last word. Amen? So, with that said, he says this phrase, and we take it completely out of context, because we want to make it happy, don't we? We want to make it happy, but when we look at the world, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. And if you remember that word, what glory means, it's our identity. I don't care, I don't know where you're at today. But the four walls that are around you and the building that's around you, those aren't your identity. You go around and say, I go to Dandridge Full Gospel Ministry. But where your glory really exists in what he was willing to do for us. That's our glory. Because that's who he is, and that's what he gave us. Because my God was willing to carry my mistakes and my failure. He took responsibility for me. He became what I was so I could become who he is. And I could properly reflect his image in the world. And as I wrestle back and forth with these things, I know that even my own evil does not get the last word. My own failure does not get the last word in the story. Because my hope doesn't exist in some frivolous thing made of smoke. My hope exists in a real person who's more real to me than anything around me, who's always with me, who will always be with me. And there's an empty tomb to prove it. Amen? So I'll end with a word of prayer, and I'll let you guys fellowship. And it's good. It's great. I love you guys. Just remember that. Do not place your identity in anything else. In what the clothes you wear, the car you drive, those are not what make you. The church you go to, church is not a building, it's not an idea, it's people who gather around him. The only righteous one, the one who loved us before we